not stress over the cola trap. Hey, I am Chuck the bureaucrat, and lately a lot of people have been reaching out to me, like stressed out or worried or just plain overthinking about the cola trap. Now, the cola trap is a fairly arcane, bureaucratic knothole that retirees get pulled through because of the way that the retired cost of living adjustment gets calculated. In effect, it's possible for people who serve longer to get a smaller pension for the rest of their life. Colonel Doug Fowler wrote a really good Air War College paper on this, and well, to be honest, I've put out a silly number of videos on it. But how much should you really be worrying about this? Well, in this video, I'm going to make the case that you should not make too much of this situation. Cola trap isn't right. It's not fair, but it also is something that we don't really have control over. And later, when I show you how the history of these cola rates has been applied, you'll see that it doesn't make a huge difference in your monthly pension. And I know. I have said that under the right conditions, it can have a significant impact, but those conditions are rare and they are unknowable at the time you have to pick your retirement date. So don't worry about what you can't control. In this video, I'm going to explain what these cost of living adjustments are really doing. What they're really for. And then I'll show you how the annual cost of living adjustment is calculated along with those partial COLA rates. I'll point out some flaws, and then I'll run you back through 2024 to 2014 to give you some perspective on how this plays out. But before we go on, let me say this. Number one, if you don't care about the details, stop the video here. There are more important and valuable things to spend your time on. And number two, if at any point in this video you feel like you should be worrying more about the cola trap, now you don't. My whole point is that it's not a huge factor and you don't have a lot of control over it. Focus on the things you do have control over. All right, just to get started, we are going to spend most of our time working around this 18-month timeline. On the left, in black and white, you have the tail end of 1 year. And on the right, in red and black, you got the next full year. One of the reasons that we need such a long timeline is to put the months of October, November, and December into the right perspective. But we'll get to that. For now, we just want to focus on the fact that at the beginning of the year, Uncle Sugar gives you a lump of cash. And then, throughout the year, you go shopping for a whole basket of goods, over and over. And as time passes, the cost of those goods, they increase and increase due to inflation. So by the end of the year, the money that Uncle Sam has given you has lost some buying power. Well, what are you going to do? Well, here comes Uncle Sam again, and he is going to increase the amount of money that he gives you to get you back to the same buying power that you had at the beginning of the year. This is important. Cost of living adjustments are not like an increase in your pay because of a promotion or because you've got more years of service. Those increases reflect increased compensation for increased responsibilities in the future. COLA rates offset lost buying power in the past. In a bit, you're going to hear me talk about being exposed to inflation. And that's meant to emphasize that cost of living adjustments are offsetting those increases in the cost of goods caused by inflation that happened in the past. Okay, before we talk about the partial cost of living adjustment that happens in the very first year that you're retired and which causes the COLA trap, before we do that, I want to talk about the annual cost of living adjustment and how it gets figured. This annual rate is the rate that is going to apply to all retirees who have 12 or more months of retirement under their belt. The law, Title 10, Section 1401A, breaks the year into 4 quarters that consist of 3 months each. The most important quarter is called the base quarter, and that's July, August, and September. Now, I have labeled the other quarters along the calendar year. So January, February, March is the first quarter, and October, November, December is the fourth quarter. This runs into a subtle source of confusion about how COLA rates are handled. And it all has to do with where the beginning and end of the year is. Notice that the base quarter is the last quarter of the fiscal year. So COLA rates have this real fiscal year to fiscal year flavor about them. But partial COLA rates get reported as if they're based on a calendar year. New COLA rates start on the 1st of January, again, bringing in that calendar year flavor. So we want to pay close attention to these different time periods and how they're covered. So I have numbered the quarters 1, 2, and 4 because there is a very special consideration about October, November, December that only makes sense if you treat it as sort of the fourth option. All right, back to the annual cost of living adjustment. To get this, DoD takes the average of the Consumer Price Index for the 3 months in each base quarter. For those of you who might want to try to do this at home, technically they're using the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, CPIW. But that particular rabbit hole, it detracts from the fact that in the end, these details are not the most important thing to be watching. Okay, once they get those averages, they calculate the percent change from year 1 to year 2. Now, let's just pause for a second and think about somebody who has been retired for the full year. They have been exposed to inflation, October, November, December, all the way through September. The cost of things that they buy have gone up, pretty much like the CPI. So that makes sense. All right, now let's look at how the partial COLA rate is calculated for a person who retires in the first quarter. I don't know, let's say January 1st. They are exposed to inflation January, February, March, all the way through September. So their cost of living adjustment is based off the change from the fourth quarter to the base quarter. Someone who retires in second quarter, say April, is exposed to inflation for a shorter length of time, so their cost of living adjustment is the percent change from the first quarter to the base quarter. The pattern keeps following. If they retire in July, then they have even less exposure to inflation and a lower COLA rate. But now we come to the case where somebody retires in the fourth quarter, and at first, this is going to seem catastrophic. This is the problem that keeps people up at night, but trust me, in a second, it's going to make a lot of sense and you're going to worry about it less. All along, these partial COLA adjustments have been correcting a retiree's pension for the inflation they experienced up to the end of September. A person who retires in October, November, or December gets a partial COLA rate of 0 on the 1st of January because they weren't exposed to any of the inflation that the January 1st COLA adjustment is supposed to correct for. And that is good news for this fourth quarter guy. To see what I mean, we got to shift our timeline just a bit. We want to look at year 2 and year 3, which means we got to pull our little guy to the left so that he stays in the fourth quarter of year 2. He gets nothing at the end of year 2, but at the end of year 3, he gets the full annual COLA adjustment, even though he may not have been retired for all 12 months. And if he gets out in November or December, he gets the full annual COLA adjustment, even though he's only been exposed to inflation for like 10 or 11 months. This demonstrates an important point about the COLA trap. It tends to boost your pension, not cut it. People who think a lot about the COLA trap should bear in mind that this is about leveraging a gain, not avoiding a loss. Now, this system has a couple of features that don't seem fair. But, as my old real estate instructor used to say, fair is just a four-letter word that starts with F. For one thing, two soldiers retiring in different months of the same quarter get the same COLA adjustment, even though the guy retiring earlier actually experiences more inflation. And if there are sharp increases in the CPI in a single month, the COLA rate can be very different for the different quarters. This system isn't fair, but what would be fair? We could argue about that all day, but I want to stick to the point that all of this it's just not worth sleepless nights. And so I'm going to suggest that fair would mean prorating the full annual COLA adjustment based off of the number of months that a service member is exposed to inflation. We're going to straight line it the same way that the federal employee retirement system does. All right, get ready, because in a second here, we're going to flick through about 11 years worth of COLA adjustments. For now, I just want to get oriented to this chart by looking at the cost of living adjustment that was applied for 2024. To begin with, I'm assuming we have a service member who has hit exactly 20 years of service on the 1st of January. And I'm assuming that he has an average high 36 months of base pay of $10,000, which is not going to change no matter how long he serves. Now, two things to note here. Number one, the amount of his base pay doesn't matter. Effects are exactly the same no matter what his base pay is, and I'm using 10,000 just because it's easy math. And number two, most people with 20 years of service have not actually maxed out their high 36. I'm just using 20 years to keep the math clean. Next, the months across the bottom. And the best way to think about these is that they represent 12 possible courses of action for our service member. If he retires on April 1st, he will experience a different initial pension and COLA adjustment than if he retired on the 1st of November. Okay, in this chart, we have three values to look at. First is the black bar representing the initial pension the service member would receive if they chose to retire in each month. The initial pension goes up each month because the service member's years of service is going up by, well, 1/12 of 2.5%. His multiplier is getting larger. On this chart, that black bar represents the initial pension that he would get each month in 2023 if he retired in 2023. The green bar represents the increase in pension due to the 2024 COLA adjustment. Taken together, the stacked black and green bars total the monthly pension of our retired service member for each month in 2024. The red dotted line represents what the COLA increase would have been if the annual COLA was prorated. That's just my version of fair. Now, let me just highlight a couple of points here. Look at June and July. If our service member retired in July, then their 2024 pension would be noticeably smaller than if they had retired 1 month sooner. But what's the real difference? It's less than $50 pre-tax. If you're sweating that kind of detail, I just don't think it's worth it. And sure, you can see how the July retiree would feel jilted. I mean, he's on par with the February retiree. But notice that he's doing absolutely fine against that prorated line. In terms of fairness, the COLA system is being generous to everybody except our July guy. Oh, and the October, November, December options. They may look suboptimal in 2024, but remember, in 2025, they get that special boost we talked about. Okay, now let's look back in time and see how this has really played out. In 2023, you see March leading the pack, and that's why you will often hear people planning to retire on March 1st. July, August, they are below the prorated line, and while it does happen, it doesn't happen every year. 2022 rates, March or June, it doesn't really seem to make a difference. 2021 is more like what you would expect, and hey, July is doing pretty good. 2020, June's the winner. Same in 2019, but we are still talking about less than $50. 2018, no, 2017 has some really low inflation, and so does 2016. I mean, the CPI actually went down in 2016. The point here is that in the absence of inflation, the COLA discussion is meaningless. 2015 is June again. 2014 is pretty fair. Okay, you've stuck with me this far, and I appreciate it. Hopefully you understand why it's important that you understand the COLA trap, think about it, but don't obsess over it. There are more important things to consider, like your leave plan, especially if you have kids or you're going to move immediately after you retire. Oh, and be careful not to carry too much leave into your retirement year. You want to think about connecting qualifying service to injuries or illnesses through presumptive conditions. You got your health, dental, and vision insurance. You can't enroll in those things until after you've retired. You got tax rules. I mean, there's some states that give very generous benefits that might make it worth retiring in like October, November, December, just to lock in an extra year of those benefits. And finally, I want to ask you for some help. You see this little guy? I like him. Someone, somewhere, obviously put a lot of time and effort into these characters. Tons of these images are just scattered across the web. Kind of looking for an artist who can crank out images like this. So if you know somebody, or even better, if you know the person who drew these figures, let me know.